Welcome to the presentation of Module 4, Creating a List Report, an Introduction to the Genero Report Designer. The purpose of this module is to introduce you to the Genero Report Designer. So at the end of this instruction, you're going to be able to create a report using the Genero Report Designer. You'll be able to associate a data schema or a .rdd file with the report you've created. You're going to be able to work within the structure of a report, and you'll be able to use a list report template when you're creating a new report. The Genero Report Designer, or GRD, is our default tool for editing our .4rp files, which are our report design documents. From within Genero Studio, there's a variety of ways that you can open an existing report or that you can create a new report. So from the project view, if you want to open an existing report, you can either double-click on the 4rp file, or you can right-click the 4rp file and select Open from the drop-down menu. If you're creating a new report, you can right-click on an application node, a library node, or a virtual folder node, and you can select the new file, Empty Report. You can also right-click an application, library, or virtual folder node and select New File, Templates, and then select from the available templates. From the top menu, you can do File, New Reports, and then you can elect to either create an empty report or to create a report from a template. Alternatively, if you already have the 4rp file, you can do File, Open, then locate that 4rp file and select it. For the remainder of these slides, I'm going to first present some theory on a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to take you off and show you examples using Genero Studio itself. So to start with a look at our Genero Report Designer, when you open a report, it opens the report in a main work area. So as we see here, we have the GUI representation of the report in the main work area, and it's surrounded by dockable views. The dockable views can appear as panels. They can have tabs within those panels. You'll notice that they can appear to the left side, along the bottom, and to the right side. So let me go to my Genero Studio. If I want to open my order list report, since I have an order list example.4rp, all I have to do is double click on that example and it opens it up in my main work area. I'm going to go ahead and decrease the size of this a bit so that you can have a better view of the report. I can do that by using the plus and minus keys. I could also hold down the control key and use my mouse wheel while positioned over this work area. Now the report appears in the main work area. All around the main work area, we have our dockable views. And by dockable, it means that I can double click on one of these views and that view pops out into a box. You can see I can move this view and reposition it around my work area as I need. You'll notice that this time when I drop my report structure view back in, it actually created as a tab. If I didn't want to create it as a tab, I could double click to bring it out, and while moving, wait until I see a space appearing and I can drop it in. When you're working with a very small real estate, as I often have to do when I'm recording these videos, this can be very handy. For if I wanted to increase the size of my work area, I could temporarily remove some of my views. My work area size has increased. If I want to go and add those views back, I go to the window menu, I select views, and I select which views I want to add back into Genero Studio. The visual representation of the report itself is shown in the main work area. And the main work area is a near WYSIWYG view of the report. And what this means is that you're given an idea of what the report is going to look like, although it's not exactly as a report is going to appear when it prints out. And there's a variety of reasons for this. The first reason is that it does not repeat any repeated detail items. So for example, if you have a report that's producing a list, only the first item of the list is going to appear on the WYSIWYG view. Also, the order is not necessarily the page header at the top, detail in the middle, and the page footer at the bottom. Because of some of the rules of Genero Report Writer, it's necessary for the page header and page footer to appear at the top of our WYSIWYG style view, and then the detail to appear at the bottom. Now, report objects can be selected, dragged, and dropped in this view, so it does provide a working area for you to then go and format and rearrange your report. So if I go and I look at my sample report, what you can see is inside of this sample report, I have a header area, I have a footer area, and then I have some detail. Now this detail, as the rows get streamed across, is going to repeat multiple times. I can organize things within this view. Now that items are here, I can drag and drop to rearrange items if that's what I desire to do. One of the tools you have for working with reports is a view that's known as the data view. And the data view, you select an RDD file, and that defines what is coming across from your 4GL report application. This includes the grouping structure. So for example, here I have my order external by set to use the group user ID. I have the order external by also specifying an order ID. In this example, I had one specifying a line num. And then for every row that's being sent across, I'm given the variables or the data objects that are being sent across with each row. If I had used some before group triggers or some after group within my report block, they would also appear here, showing me what we call the grouping structure, or where we're allowed to tell the report designer to expect a change in store number or a change in order number, what I should do beforehand, what I should do afterhand. Once you've identified the RDD and you've brought in these fields, you are then allowed to drag and drop from the data view into the main workspace or into what we call the report structure view. When you drag and drop, the default object type is going to be based upon the data type as you see listed here. So let me return to Genero Studio. Here I have my report. It's already been associated with an RDD, and I can see that RDD sitting out here inside of this data view. If I wanted to add fields across, I can drag and drop and place those fields onto my report. We'll talk more about dragging and dropping from the data view in later slides. Some additional things to know about the data view. Right next to the variable name and the data type, we have what's known as sample data. And this sample data is what's going to show up if you want to preview your report. So when we click on a preview icon, it's a little paragraph symbol that we'll talk about later. Instead of displaying the fields, it'll use the sample data to give you a better visual representation of what's going to happen when actual data is being displayed on the report. You can change this sample data to improve your view. You can click on the order arrow up here at the top to change the sort order of the variables. You'll notice by default they're being ordered by the table. You can go ahead and change it so that it's ordered instead alphabetically. You also have a series of icons that go across the top that by selecting one icon over another is going to change some default values that are applied to the variable when they are dragged and dropped, such as the width or the caption or the text or the value that's being displayed. With the introduction of 221, you no longer needed to use the printx statement each time. You could use the print statement. However, if you want to change the names of the variables that are being displayed in the data view, you can use the printx variable to provide a different name, a name that may be perhaps more meaningful to your report designer. So again, to go into my Genero Studio itself, if I wanted to change one of these sample data, I could just double click on that sample data, and instead of it saying foobar when it appears in the preview mode, I could enter in a real date, formatted as I expect it to be formatted, and now whenever the preview mode is used, this data will be used to give me my sample. I've already talked about how here I can see I've organized by tables. I have my order table, my item table, my state table. If you're better off working with your variables listed alphabetically, I would click on this arrow, and then my data values are listed alphabetically. We'll talk about these icons when dragging and dropping as we start to create reports, but your basic is, are you creating what we call a form field value object? Is it going to display the data being sent across? Is it a label? If it's a label, you'll be creating a form field title object. If you're building a list-based report, you'll be either creating a table column value object, or you'll be creating a table column title object, like a table header. And finally, if you're creating a table column value object for a column that doesn't have a title, then you can go ahead and click this fifth icon. For these icons, don't worry too much about them now. We'll see them in use when we start going out there and actually working with our reports. Now, in addition to our data view, we also have a toolbox. Not everything we want to place on a report is going to be a value coming across from our report application. You may want to put container objects out there. You may want to put in your own titles and your own text that's not part of the data being streamed across by your report applications. In order to do this stuff, you go out there and you work from the toolbox. Now, the toolbox is a series of items you can place on a report. You'll drag and drop them onto your report. Once they're placed on your report, you can go in and edit the properties of the object to change how it's being displayed, where it's positioned, and a variety of things that the properties control. When you're working with the toolbox, realize it's organized in logical groups, and we tried to put the frequently used objects at the top of our toolbox. So inside of Genero Studio, next to the Data View tab, I have a Toolbox tab. And this Toolbox tab is listing those objects that I can place onto my report. For example, if I wanted to put some text down here in the report, I would drag over a Word box. Once I have my Word box dragged over, I could go and I could change the properties so that the properties then specify something different than insert your text here. I'll just put in hello world. And then I now have text that's on my report that's not really part of the data that's being streamed across. So again, there's a variety of objects that we can place on this report. They're organized into logical groups. You can expand and contract the groups by pressing on the plus sign. And once I place the object on, I can select that object. I can then go to the properties, and I can change the properties to affect how this is appearing on my report. The next view, a very frequently used view when you're working with reports, is known as the report structure view. The report structure view is comprised of a tree view of what you're building inside of that main work area. It's comprised of nodes with parents and children. It has a series of red dots, which are known as report triggers, and these reflect the structure of the 4GL report control blocks. So the fact that I have a group store num means I've ordered externally by store num, and whenever the data streams across, when the store number changes, this group store num trigger can take effect. Now the branch nodes control how the children are laid out. If you have things labeled in what we call dynamic layouting, the order that they're laid out is going to be the order that they appear within their node. Now report objects can be selected, dragged, and dropped into the report structure, and they can also be reorganized once they are inside the report structure. This report structure actually represents the XML structure of the 4RP file. If I go and look at my report structure inside of Genero Studio, what I can see, I have my visual representation of the report here in the main work area, but I have its XML representation in the report structure. Just so we can view all of it easier, I'm going to change so I have two tabs. But now that I look at my report structure, what I want to see is that I have page headers, I have page footers, I then have some trigger nodes, I have some other containers down here that contain things like order totals and store totals. And as I move around my structure view, what you should see is that it's highlighting the appropriate item on my report itself. What this means is that you're going to not only be working inside of your main work area, you're also going to be working within the report structure. If I want to quickly go to find my page header, I can click on my page header inside of the report structure, and you'll see that it's displayed with emphasis in my main work area. I've mentioned this once, but it's worth repeating that each object that you place on a report has a series of properties assigned to that object. You can view the properties and you can edit the properties by selecting a report item. When you select that report item, the properties for that report item appears in the properties view. If in the properties view you see a bold name, that means that the property specified is a non-default value. So all of these that are bold up here, I know were not the default values of the object, but instead values that either were populated as I dragged and dropped it over, or they were values that I changed once the object appeared on the report. If I want to edit these items, I can either work inside the field, the space inside the properties. I can click on the little return area to set it to a default value, or I can click the FX button to enter an expression editor. All of the properties can have what's known as RTL expressions applied to define those properties. If I want to enter an RTL expression, I would go ahead and click on that function button. Now, just as we saw within the toolbox, inside the property box, we've divided it into logical groups, each property sectioned off underneath a logical group header, and I can expand or collapse those groups as I need so that I'm only viewing those properties that I want to work with. If I go back and look at my Genero Studio, let's take an example from here. If I want to click on a field, you'll notice that when I click on a report object, the object is highlighted inside of its report structure. And once I click on that report object, when I go into the Properties tab, this Properties tab is about the object that I've clicked. Again, if I just want to see specific groups because that's what I'm working with, I can go ahead and expand and collapse that group so that my properties that I'm trying to view are quickly visible. There are two types of report settings that you can only access through a menu. One of those is paper settings. If I go to File, Report Properties, Paper Settings, a dialog box opens that allows me to specify paper settings. What orientation do I want? Is it portrait or landscape? What are my units of measure? What page size format do I want to have? I can use a standard page size format where we give you a list of standard page sizes, or you can define custom page sizes. Within the page itself, I can specify margins. How much margin do I want at the top and bottom? How much margin do I want from left to right? So back to my report, I have my report selected. If I went to File, Report Properties, I could open Paper Settings, and here's where I could specify I want it to be landscape or I want it to be portrait. Perhaps you're in Europe and you want to use A4 as your paper size. You can select A4. I'm going to turn it back to letter for the purpose of my demonstration. If I want different margins, I can increase and decrease margins. If I wanted to do my units in inches, I can go ahead and select inches, and again I can decrease or increase my margins there. The other report-specific properties that you can set only through a menu item is your output configuration. If you go to File, Report Properties, Output Configuration, then you can specify default output settings. You can specify if this report should be output to either SVG, to an image, or to PDF. You can also do special things such as specifying rendering, specifying specific page ranges that should be printed. If you're outputting to image, the image area appears up and you can specify what type of image you want to do, what its resolution should be, and what the image prefix name should be when it starts to actually create the images that are the resulting from a report. So again, I can go into my Genero Studio or my Report Designer. I can go to Report Properties, and if I select my output configuration, I can change it between SVG, PDF, and image. Let me just select image. When I select image, you'll see that I can say what kind of image I want to create. I can give what resolution I want it to be, and I can enter the prefix name that will be used when a report is processed and the image files for that report are created.